Welcome to the deep dive. So today, our mission really is to try and navigate through some incredibly complex, often really polarized narratives,
Yeah, we're talking about global conflicts, how information gets, well, put out there.
and crucially, how we all make sense of it. We've got a stack of sources here, including a pretty interesting recent YouTube podcast transcript. We're aiming to pull out the key insights, those real aha moments.
Right. The goal is to help you feel informed, but not completely swamped by it all.
Exactly.
And I think this deep dive, it's really an exploration into information itself, how it's made, how we consume it, and maybe critically, how it often gets weaponized. Hopefully helping you, the listener, to kind of critically assess the stories you're hearing, to look a bit deeper.
Okay, so jumping right in, our sources immediately took us into quite a heated debate. It's about how mainstream media handles conflict, specifically in the Netherlands.
Ah,
And it throws up some startling accusations, things that might challenge, common perceptions. We're looking at a critique of NPO Radio 1, a big public broadcaster there, and its show, De News BV.
right, featuring commentators like Natasha Gips and Francisco Van Joel from De Joop.
That's them. And the claim, according to these sources, is that they're accused of pushing, well, left-wing propaganda, especially in how they frame Israel's actions.
A genocide angle.
Yes, presenting it as a fait accompli, like it's already a proven fact.
Okay, so when we look at that claim, it's vital to unpack the actual legal and historical meaning of genocide.
Good point.
Our sources define it pretty clearly. A premeditated plan to destroy a group.
Right.
And if you compare that, as the sources do, to historical examples,
Mm.
the Armenian genocide, the Yazidis, the Hutu and Tutsi in Rwanda, there was documented intent, a clear plan to destroy.
Okay.
The sources make a key distinction here. They say that while Palestinian militant groups, and maybe even a large part of their society, openly talk about destroying Jews, they claim Israeli society hasn't expressed a similar desire towards Palestinians. They even point out Israel apparently delivers food to Gaza.
Even while the sources claim Hamas steals, over 80% of aid?
Correct.
Proven by the UN, they say.
Exactly. So that difference in stated intent is, central to this critique of the media's portrayal.
So how do these narratives, take hold so effectively? The sources paint a pretty stark picture of Hamas's propaganda efforts.
Yeah, it seems quite sophisticated.
They talk about staged photos, a Turkish press photographer, apparently, images like a mother with a sick, undernourished child, people begging at an empty truck, that sort of thing.
Right, designed to evoke a specific emotional response.
And there's even testimony cited from a former AP reporter. They claim AP was actually threatened by Hamas
Threatened how?
to remove details about Hamas fighters dressed as civilians being counted in the civilian death toll. And this reporter says AP just complied. Complied with Hamas censorship is the phrase used.
Wow, okay, that paints a picture of, a managed narrative, doesn't it?
It does. Which leads us to some specific examples of alleged misrepresentation in the media.
Like the story about that mysterious paralyzing disease in Gaza.
Exactly. Linked apparently to a researcher, Lotta Plump, from Erasmus MC, who'd previously worked for UNRWA.
Ah, the UNRWA connection. And the implication, the sources suggest, was some kind of link to, chemical attacks by Israel.
That seems to be the insinuation described. And the criticism here is aimed at mainstream media, Noss has mentioned specifically, for apparently not fact-checking this stuff properly before, putting it out there.
Which, if true, would obviously contribute to spreading misinformation.
Yeah. And the concerns seem to deepen when you look at this major piece of research mentioned, a report by Mek van Charante, described as over 250 pages, not even published yet.
Okay, 250 pages. That's substantial. What's the core claim?
Well, the sources say it exposes a whole succession of fake news, debunked news, withholding of facts, and deliberate framing, specifically in NPO Op 3 and Nosjug Journal, the youth news.
And an example.
Consistently calling Hamas a resistance movement instead of, what the sources argue is more accurate, a terrorist group.
That framing, that choice of words, it matters.
Hugely.
And if you connect that kind of media framing to the wider society,
Yeah.
you can see the impact. The sources talk about that J'accuse letter.
Oh, yeah. Signed by hundreds of Dutch cultural figures. Big names like Claudia de Brave, Katja Sherman, Umberto Tan.
Right. And the sources characterize it pretty harshly, calling it badly written propaganda for Hamas.
Ooh.
Because they say completely omitted any mention of the hostages or October 7th.
Right.
And the sources point out the the sheer irony of calling it j'accuse,
Yeah.
given that Emil Zola's original was famously defending a Jewish officer.
Ah, so using that title kind of twists its original meaning, they're implying.
That seems to be the point they're making, yes. It highlights a potential distortion.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit to something even more maybe contentious that the sources explore, this link between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism.
Always a complex and sensitive area.
Definitely. The material brings up this case, Dylan Jeskis facing a lawsuit over a tweet about a singer, Deli Bob.
Ah, because Del Bob refused to play at a Maccabi football event due to pro-Israel ads.
That's the one. It really brought this whole polarized debate right into the spotlight.
And what's revealing here, according to the sources, is this argument that the quasi-anti-Zionist movement sometimes acts as a cover.
A cover for anti-Semitism.
That's the argument presented. And they use the example of how certain images are perceived differently. Think of those pictures of, emaciated Jewish hostages in tunnels.
Yeah.
One reportedly digging his own grave.
Yeah, horrific images.
Horrific. But while in the West, generally that's seen as terrible PR for Hamas.
Right.
The sources claim that in parts of the Arab world, it's seen as perfect PR, like a symbol of triumph over the humiliated Jew, even, they say, invoking images from Auschwitz.
God, that's a massive disconnect in perception, a huge cultural gap.
It really highlights that chasm, yeah.
And look, this next point from the sources, it really made me stop and think about how history gets twisted sometimes.
Okay.
It's about a viewpoint from academia. A Belgian professor, Dries Lesagem.
Mm-hmm.
He reportedly equates finding Hamas's brutality worse than, quote, 80 years of Zionist land theft, bloody oppression, and now genocide of Palestinians. He equates finding Hamas worse than that to condoning Nazism in World War II.
Wow. Okay. That's a heavy comparison.
It's a really challenging claim presented in the material.
And that viewpoint, as the sources analyze it, well, it raises critical questions, doesn't it? Because it arguably legitimizes Hamas as a resistance.
And blurs the lines with the IDF.
It potentially blurs that moral distinction, the sources suggest. They come down very hard on Hamas, using stark comparisons, calling them the SS of this time or ISIS of this time.
Really strong language to emphasize the perceived brutality.
Extremely strong. And then you have the argument used to, well, justify Hamas's violence. The narrative, as the sources describe it, that it's all born out of Israel's years of repression, apartheid, land theft, exploitation.
The reaction argument.
Exactly. And it goes as far as comparing Hamas's actions to, say, what Dutch resistance fighters might have done if they'd brutalized German civilians in the same way. The sources also express concern about what they see as a significant presence of anti-Semites in the Netherlands, who they argue use anti-Zionism as a sort of shield.
They mention the numbers too, don't they? Like 40,000 Jews versus maybe 1 million Muslims.
Yeah, highlighting that demographic context. And they contrast this with how quickly, they claim, accusations of Islamophobia can arise when Islam is criticized, sometimes even leading to legal trouble.
It's a really complex, tangled web of issues there.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's widen the lens now. Shift focus to the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the bigger geopolitical picture.
The ever-shifting landscape.
Our sources are indicating the Kremlin has agreed to a meeting with Trump. That's significant, although apparently Zelensky does not want to be present yet.
Interesting. So potential shifts in dynamics there. And Trump wanting to end the war, viewing it as Joe Biden's war.
Yeah, that's reported. And his strategy apparently involves things like heavy tariffs on countries trading with Russia, like India.
Okay, so this ties into how these moves are framed, particularly in Western media, which our sources note tends to be generally anti-Trump.
Right. So how might they portray talks between Trump's guy, Steve Witkoff, and Putin? They apparently met for 3 hours.
Well, the assessment presented in our sources is pretty blunt. Ukraine cannot win the war militarily.
Yeah.
That's the analysis offered, which suggests potential compromises down the line. Things like Crimea being ceded to Russia, maybe negotiating the status of other regions.
Which would be, I mean, objectively a loss for Ukraine.
Absolutely. The sources acknowledge that. And other negotiation points could include Ukraine's future military strength and that whole denazification narrative from Russia.
Ah, yes. Which the sources examine, especially looking at the reverence for figures like Stepan Bandera.
Who, as they point out, did fight alongside the Nazis historically.
Yeah.
It's a complex part of Ukrainian national identity that Russia exploits.
What really struck me here is the contrast the sources draw. You have Europe, where war feels like an exception, an aberration.
Mhm.
And then you have the Russian reality described, where
Oh.
people in Moscow are apparently feasting. The war feels very far away for many.
While the economy is on a full war footing, churning out vast amounts of munitions.
Yeah, it's just a totally different national experience of the conflict, underscores how differently people process these things.
And these big geopolitical narratives, they aren't just shaped by governments, are they? They're also influenced by, well, broader societal trends, the media landscape itself.
Which brings us to that wider critique the sources offer about what gets called woke culture.
Right, that term often used for heightened social justice awareness.
Yeah.
The sources analyze it for what they see as, well, hypocrisies and contradictions
Yeah.
on both the woke left and woke right, interestingly.
They use an example, don't they? John Leardam, the director of the Slavery Museum.
Yeah, pointing out his own family were slave traders. They use this to illustrate what they call the dilemma of black and white thinkers, people who maybe ignore historical complexities, like the fact there were black slave traders.
Right, how certain narratives can kind of airbrush history.
Exactly. Selectively presenting facts.
So how does this all manifest in that split between mainstream and alternative media? The sources use Ongehoord Nederland, ON-N, as a key example in the Netherlands.
A public broadcaster, funded by taxpayers.
Right, and the real irony highlighted is that its editor, Joos Niemeller, was apparently pro-vaccine initially.
And now the platform is strongly anti-vaccine,
Yeah.
calling them bioweapons or saying they contain chips.
That's what the sources report, yeah. The fact that a public broadcaster has, in their view, become a hardcore conspiracy broadcaster, it just shows how wide that gap is between media worlds.
In trying to bridge that gap, the sources suggest it's incredibly difficult.
They share an anecdote, right? Trying to get someone from the alternative scene, Arno van Kessel.
The lawyer arrested for the bioweapon claims.
Yeah, trying to get him on a mainstream show like De Orange Zoomer.
How did that go down?
Apparently, it was seen as an affront by the alternative media crowd. They see mainstream journalists as controlled opposition.
That deep distrust really prevents any kind of productive conversation, doesn't it? Makes it hard to even agree on basic facts.
Totally. And finally, what really comes through is the difficulty, maybe the impossibility, of engaging with what the sources call the hardcore core of alternative media consumers.
They're described as, normal people, jobs, families.
Yeah, but completely disengaged in their heads is the phrase used in the material, often ending up isolated within their own echo chambers.
It's a really profound societal disconnect that the sources are pointing to.
So here we are at the end of this deep dive, and wow, we've covered some ground. From media bias and huge geopolitical shifts to, well, the insidious ways propaganda works and these deep, deep divisions in society. It just hammers home, doesn't it, how crucial critical thinking is. Not just consuming information, but really thinking about it.
Absolutely. In a world where narratives seem more polarized than ever, where basic facts are up for debate, the responsibility really lands on each of us.
So the question left hanging is,
how do you, the listener, choose to navigate this? How do you sort truth from spin? And what part do we all play in making sure, well, that facts actually matter more than manipulated stories?
yeah, keep seeking out different perspectives, keep questioning.
Question everything. Engage with information not just passively, but as a critical, informed citizen. It's more important than ever.